Your soulmate wants to talk to you right now. Don't miss what they have to say. Beloved, your soulmate wants to talk to you right now. And there is one sentence they need to take back. A sentence they used against you more than once. Maybe during arguments. Maybe during the final days of your relationship. Perhaps even during the conversation that ended everything. Your soulmate looked at you and said, "When I needed you most, you didn't stand up for me." Beloved, they believed that for years. They believed there had been one defining moment when everyone was judging them, their reputation was collapsing, and the person they loved most, you, had stayed silent. That memory became proof. Proof that perhaps you loved them privately but would not risk anything publicly. Proof that when being beside them became uncomfortable, you stepped away. And beloved, your soulmate has just discovered something that has completely destroyed that version of the past. Because today, an old recording surfaced. A recording from the room where everything happened. Your soulmate pressed play expecting to hear people discussing them. Instead, they heard your voice. Clear. Firm. Angry. And you were not agreeing with the room. You were defending them. At one point, someone told you, "You don't have to ruin your own opportunity over this." And beloved, your answer was, "Then don't make my opportunity depend on pretending something about them that I know isn't true." Your soulmate stopped the recording. Replayed it. Then broke down. Because while they were outside believing you had abandoned them, you were inside that room risking something important to defend their name. And you never told them. Beloved, that is why your soulmate's message today is different. It does not begin, "I miss you." It begins, "I owe you an apology for something I accused you of for years." Then, "Please talk to me. I just heard what you said in that room." Beloved, let me take you back to that day. There was a period when your soulmate was part of something that mattered deeply to them. Maybe a creative project. A professional group. An organization. A team they had worked with for years. Something that gave your soulmate identity, opportunity, and belonging. At first, everything had been good. Your soulmate worked hard. Perhaps too hard. They were the person who stayed late. Solved problems. Took responsibility. Maybe they were ambitious. Opinionated. Not always easy. But beloved, they cared. And you knew that. You had seen the nights nobody else saw. The laptop open long after everyone else went home. The stress. The phone calls. The moments your soulmate wondered, "Am I actually good enough for this?" You would tell them, "Stop acting like one bad day means you don't belong there." Perhaps they smiled. "You always defend me." You replied, "Only when you're right." Maybe they laughed. Very comforting. Beloved, perhaps that was the nature of your love. You did not blindly agree. If your soulmate behaved badly, you told them. If they were being unfair, you said so. But if someone accused them of something you knew was false, you did not pretend neutrality just because neutrality was easier. And beloved, that difference would eventually matter. The project entered a difficult period. Maybe there was pressure, deadlines, money problems, conflicting personalities. And your soulmate had a disagreement with someone influential. Perhaps a director, senior colleague, someone people were afraid to challenge. Your soulmate believed one thing should happen. This person wanted something else. At first, professional disagreement. Then personal. Maybe your soulmate said in a meeting, "I don't think this is honest." The room became uncomfortable. The senior person replied, "Are you accusing me of something?" Your soulmate answered, "I'm saying we shouldn't present information we can't support." Beloved, that was enough. Something changed. Perhaps your soulmate did not realize how quickly people began talking after that. They were suddenly difficult, uncooperative, emotional, hard to work with. Maybe someone said, "They always need control." Another, "They think they know everything." Beloved, some criticisms may have contained pieces of truth. Your soulmate could be stubborn, maybe defensive. But then the story crossed a line. People began saying your soulmate had intentionally damaged the project. Maybe leaked something. Perhaps deliberately delayed work. Maybe undermined another person. Something you knew was not true because you had been close enough to see what actually happened. Perhaps one evening your soulmate came to you furious. "They're blaming me." For what? They explained. You stared. "That's not what happened." "I know." Do they know? They know enough. Beloved, perhaps your soulmate was panicking. Because an internal meeting had been scheduled. People would give statements. The organization would decide whether your soulmate remained part of the project. Maybe their career could be affected. Their reputation. Future opportunities. And beloved, you had your own position there too. Perhaps not as important. But you were being considered for an upcoming role. A contract. A fellowship. An opportunity that would matter to your future. The night before the meeting, your soulmate asked, "Are you going to be there?" Yes. They looked relieved. Then, "Please don't get involved more than you need to." Beloved, perhaps you frowned. What does that mean? "I don't want this hurting you." You said, "I'll tell the truth." Your soulmate looked at you. Then, "That's all I want." Beloved. Remember that. That is exactly what you did. But your soulmate never saw it. The next day, the meeting began. Perhaps your soulmate was asked to speak first. They explained their side. Other people challenged them. Some legitimate concerns. Some exaggerations. Maybe the senior person said, "This is not about disagreement. This is about trust." Your soulmate responded, "Then tell the truth about what happened." Tension. Beloved, eventually someone running the meeting asked your soulmate to step outside while the rest of the group discussed next steps. They hated it. But rules were rules. So your soulmate walked into the hallway. And there you were. Or perhaps you were still inside because you had been asked to give your own account. Your soulmate thought, good. They'll tell them what they know. Minutes passed. Then 10. 20. Maybe your soulmate sat outside staring at the door. Someone came out. Not you. Then another person. Still not you. Perhaps eventually the influential person stepped into the hallway. They saw your soulmate. Said nothing. Then you emerged several minutes later. Beloved, your face looked different. Tense. Upset. Your soulmate stood. What happened? You looked toward the room. Then said, not here. Beloved. That was your first mistake. Or perhaps not mistake, just a decision that would later be misunderstood. Your soulmate asked, did you talk? Yes. What did you say? You looked exhausted. I told them what I knew. Your soulmate searched your face. Did you defend me? Beloved. Maybe you hated the wording. Defend. As though loyalty required pretending your soulmate had done nothing wrong. So you answered, I told the truth. Your soulmate heard hesitation. They wanted, yes. Of course I defended you. Instead, I told the truth. Their fear filled in the rest. Maybe, what does that mean? You said, it means exactly what I said. Beloved, then someone called your soulmate back inside. No time. The decision came. Perhaps your soulmate was removed from a leadership role. Maybe suspended from the project. Not completely destroyed, but publicly humiliated. The official explanation was vague, breakdown of trust. Communication concerns. Team conflict. Beloved, the worst kind of language. Enough to damage reputation. Not specific enough to challenge cleanly. Your soulmate left devastated. Outside, perhaps they saw you speaking with the senior person again. You were arguing quietly. But from a distance? It may not have looked like arguing. Maybe it looked like conversation. Your soulmate's mind was already in pain. They thought, they're protecting their own position. Maybe the senior person placed a hand on your shoulder. Perhaps said something. You stepped away. Your soulmate saw only the final moment. Not what came before it. Beloved, you approached. Can we go somewhere and talk? Your soulmate responded, I don't want to talk. What? Not now. You saw the anger. Maybe asked, what happened? Your soulmate laughed bitterly. You know what happened. Beloved. You did not. Not fully. Perhaps you thought they were simply reacting to the decision. So you gave them space. That evening, your soulmate finally called. Their voice cold. Did they offer you the position? Beloved. You froze. What? The role. Silence. Then you realized. Maybe during the meeting, yes, someone had said, if you distance yourself from this dispute, we can still move forward with your application. Beloved. You had refused. But your soulmate did not know. You asked, why are you asking me that? They said, just answer. Maybe you replied, no, technically true. You had not accepted anything. But your soulmate continued, did they talk to you about it? Yes. Beloved. Their mind locked onto the worst possibility. You stayed in that room and negotiated your own future while they were destroying mine. You became furious. Is that what you think happened? What am I supposed to think? Ask me. I am asking you. Beloved, two frightened people. You said, they told me supporting your version would complicate my position. Your soulmate went silent. Then perhaps asked, and? You answered, and I told them to do whatever they wanted with my position. Beloved. That should have changed everything. But your soulmate was already hurt. Maybe they said, sure. You froze. What does that mean? It means you always know what to say afterward. Beloved. That one hurt. You had just told them the truth. They did not believe you. Perhaps you said, I'm not doing this. Then ended the call. The next days became ugly. Your soulmate lost something important. You lost trust in how quickly they assumed the worst. And beloved, perhaps you were carrying something you did not tell them. Inside that meeting, the pressure on you had been much stronger than your soulmate realized. After they left the room, someone asked, you're close to them, correct? You said, yes. Then we need you to be objective. Beloved, warning sign. You answered, I can be objective. The senior person began listing accusations. Perhaps, your soulmate failed to send something. They ignored instructions. They undermined leadership. You corrected facts. No. That message was sent. Actually, that deadline was changed. They objected, but they didn't sabotage it. Beloved. At first, calm. Then someone said, you seem determined to protect them. You replied, I'm determined not to let disagreement become evidence for things that didn't happen. Beloved. Perhaps the room became colder. Then they brought up your opportunity. The upcoming role. Someone said, you should think carefully about tying your professional judgment to theirs. There. Not an explicit threat. But clear. You asked, what are you saying? The person responded, we're saying your future here is separate from their situation. Beloved. You understood the translation, stay neutral. Protect yourself. Maybe somebody said, you don't have to ruin your own opportunity over this. And beloved, that is the sentence preserved on the recording. Your reply, then don't make my opportunity depend on pretending something about them that I know isn't true. Silence. Someone said, That's not what anyone is asking. You responded, then my statement should not be a problem. Beloved. You continued. Your soulmate did have weaknesses. Maybe you admitted, they can become defensive. They should have handled certain conversations better. But then, none of that makes the accusation true. Beloved. You did something important. You did not turn your soulmate into a saint. You defended facts. That is more credible than blind loyalty. Perhaps somebody asked, would you sign the group summary? You read it. One line implied your soulmate had deliberately undermined work. You said, no, why? Because I can't verify that. Someone replied, everyone else is comfortable signing. You answered, then everyone else can put their own name on it. Beloved. That refusal mattered. Maybe it cost you the role. Perhaps not officially. No one wrote, rejected because they defended their partner. But days later, the opportunity went to somebody else. You understood. Maybe you were disappointed. But you never told your soulmate. Why? Because you knew how they would react. Guilt. They were already devastated. If you said, I lost this because I defended you, what would happen? Perhaps your soulmate would feel obligated to stay with you. Or spend years thinking they ruined your future. Beloved, you did not want that. You had chosen to tell the truth. The consequence was yours to carry. So when your soulmate asked later, did standing with me cost you anything? Maybe you said, no, beloved. Not completely true. You thought you were protecting them. But secrecy would eventually cost both of you. Because your soulmate still believed you had not truly stood with them. They saw the opportunity disappear but perhaps assumed unrelated reasons. They never knew you had refused to sign the statement. Never knew you had challenged the room. Never knew your future there had been used as pressure. And beloved, your soulmate's resentment grew. Perhaps in later arguments they would say, you were nowhere when everyone turned on me. You would stare. Maybe say, you don't know what happened in that room. They replied, then tell me. And beloved, perhaps you could have. Why didn't you? Maybe by then you were angry that you had to prove loyalty. You thought, if they know me this little, what would explaining change? Perhaps you said, I'm not going to beg you to believe I cared. Your soulmate heard evasion. You meant exhaustion. Maybe the argument ended. Then another. At some point, your soulmate said the sentence that would haunt both of you. I needed someone who would stand beside me when standing beside me was uncomfortable. Beloved. Your face changed. Because perhaps few things had been more uncomfortable than what you actually did. You responded, you have no idea what I risked for you. Your soulmate immediately said, then tell me. You paused. Maybe you almost did. Then something in you hardened. You said, it doesn't matter anymore. Beloved. That answer was a mistake. It did matter. Your soulmate took it as proof there was nothing. You took their disbelief as proof they did not know your heart. Slowly, the relationship broke around a truth that existed but was never shared correctly. Perhaps when you finally ended things, your soulmate said, "I can forgive a lot. I can't forget feeling alone in that hallway." Beloved, you almost told them. Maybe you should have. But perhaps you were tired of the relationship becoming a trial where you constantly had to submit evidence of love. So you answered, "I felt alone too." Then left. Years passed. Your soulmate kept the memory. That hallway. You walking out of the room. Your short answer, "I told them the truth." The senior person speaking to you. Your soulmate being removed. You refusing to explain later. The story became simple. When things became dangerous for them, you protected yourself. Beloved, maybe that story helped your soulmate move on. They could say, "I loved them, but they weren't there when I needed them." A clean reason. Then today happened. Perhaps the old organization is preparing an anniversary project. Maybe an archive. A documentary. Something that required digitizing old meetings. A former administrator contacts your soulmate. "We found audio from the review meeting you were involved in years ago." Beloved, your soulmate's body reacts immediately. Why would they want to hear that? Perhaps the person says, "There's something in it I think you should know." Your soulmate becomes suspicious. What? The person replies, "It involves the person who was with you at the time." You. Beloved, your soulmate agrees to receive the file. Maybe they sit alone. Headphones. Press play. At first, hearing old voices is unpleasant. Then they hear themselves being asked to leave. A door shuts. Beloved, now the part they never heard begins. Someone says, "You're close to them, correct?" Then, your voice. Yes. Your soulmate stops breathing. The meeting continues. They hear accusations. Then you correcting one after another. Your voice calm initially. Then firmer. Someone says, "They were hostile." You reply, "They were angry." That is not the same thing as sabotage. Beloved, your soulmate pauses the recording. Their eyes fill. Because perhaps for years they believed you agreed with that description. They press play. Someone, they clearly weren't committed to the project. You, "That isn't true." Then you list the extra work your soulmate did. The nights. The tasks. Facts. Beloved, your soulmate begins crying. Not dramatic yet. Then comes the opportunity. Someone says, "You don't have to ruin your own opportunity over this." Your soulmate freezes. They did not know this conversation happened. Then your voice, "Then don't make my opportunity depend on pretending something about them that I know isn't true." Beloved, your soulmate takes the headphones off. Perhaps stands. Paces. Returns. Replays. Again. Then keeps listening. Someone gives you the summary to sign. You refuse. They pressure you. You say, if you remove them for what they actually did. Don't turn their personality into evidence for something nobody can prove. Beloved. Maybe your soulmate starts sobbing. Because perhaps that was exactly what they needed someone to say. And you did. They just never heard it. Then the final part. The room is almost empty. One person says, you know, refusing to sign this may affect whether we can bring you on next cycle. Your voice, I understand. Are you sure? Then beloved, your answer, yes. Silence. Perhaps, I would rather lose the opportunity than get it because I helped make a false story look unanimous. Beloved. Your soulmate breaks. Because there it is. The thing they accused you of never doing. You stood beside them when it was uncomfortable. It did cost you. And you never used that cost to purchase loyalty. Perhaps the recording ends with something else. One person asks, are you going to tell them what you did here? Your voice becomes softer. Maybe, no, why not? Beloved. You answer, because they're already going to feel like they ruined everything. Pause. I'm not adding my opportunity to the list. There. Your soulmate cannot breathe properly for a moment. Because beloved, you did not hide it because it meant nothing. You hid it because you did not want your sacrifice becoming their burden. And then they spent years accusing you of not making one. Perhaps your soulmate puts their face in their hands. Maybe says aloud, what did I do? Not because they were the only person at fault. You had opportunities to explain. You withheld something important. But beloved, your soulmate remembers every cruel sentence. You never stood up for me. You cared more about protecting yourself. I needed someone brave. Maybe once, you loved me when loving me was easy. Beloved. Now they know. You had stood in a room where being associated with them could affect your own future. And you still said, no. The story is false. Your soulmate perhaps calls the person who sent the recording. Was that why they didn't get the role? The person becomes careful. I can't prove that was the only reason. Good. No invented certainty. But I remember there was concern about whether they were aligned with leadership. Beloved. Your soulmate closes their eyes. Maybe asks, did they ever complain? No, perhaps, they never brought it up again. Beloved. Then maybe the person says, I always thought you knew. Your soulmate whispers, I didn't. There. Perhaps they sit alone for an hour. Then open your contact. Maybe you have not spoken in years. They type, very important. Can we talk right now? Delete. Too dramatic. Try again. Something happened today and I need to apologize to you. Then perhaps, I heard the recording from that meeting. Beloved. Your phone lights up. You see their name. Perhaps your heart reacts. Then the words. The recording. Immediately you know. Maybe you have not thought about it in years. Perhaps you believed the audio was gone. You answer, what recording? Your soulmate sends the details. Beloved, maybe you sit down. Then, you heard all of it? Yes. Pause. Then your soulmate writes, why didn't you tell me? Beloved. Perhaps that question irritates you. After all these years? You respond, I tried to tell you I stood up for you. Your soulmate says, you never told me what it cost. You reply, because it wasn't your debt. Beloved. There. Your soulmate stares. You continue, I made the choice. No one forced me. I didn't want to spend the rest of our relationship saying, look what I gave up for you. Beloved. Your soulmate may cry again. Then, but I accused you of doing nothing. You answer, yes. No softening. They need the truth. Your soulmate says, I'm sorry. Perhaps you take a while. Then, what exactly are you sorry for? Beloved. Good question. Not generic apology. Your soulmate responds, for deciding what happened in that room without knowing. For turning my fear into certainty about your character. For using that hallway against you during later arguments. Then, and for making you repeatedly prove loyalty I had already received. Beloved. That one lands. Perhaps you become emotional. Because yes. Maybe even after defending them publicly, you spent months being treated like the person who abandoned them. You ask, do you know why I stopped explaining? Your soulmate answers, no, perhaps you tell them, because every explanation started feeling like another audition. Beloved. Then, I had already done it. I had already stood up. I had already lost the opportunity. And somehow I still had to convince you I was a loyal person. Pause. I got tired. Your soulmate closes their eyes. They understand. Maybe they say, I wish I had asked better. You answer, I wish I had told you clearly. Beloved. Two truths. Perhaps you add, keeping it from you wasn't healthy either. Interesting. Your soulmate says, why did you? You answer, because I didn't want you staying with me because you felt guilty. Beloved. Maybe, you had just lost something important. I could see you blaming yourself for everything. If I told you my opportunity disappeared too, I knew you'd make that your fault. Your soulmate asks, wouldn't it have been my fault? You reply, no, pause. The people who made that decision were responsible. And I was responsible for choosing what I said in the room. Beloved. That is mature. You did not want to turn sacrifice into leverage. Perhaps your soulmate says, but I should have known. You respond, no, then perhaps, you should have trusted me enough to ask before deciding the worst. There. That is the real wound. Not telepathy. Trust. Your soulmate says, "You're right." Maybe this time it does not sound defensive. Then, there's something else I need to tell you. Beloved. You almost laugh. What now? Your soulmate replies, "I have repeated that story about you to other people." Silence. Perhaps your face changes. What story? That you didn't stand up for me. Beloved. Now anger. Maybe your soulmate had told close friends. Not publicly defamed you. But their version became social truth. Perhaps people who knew both of you thought, you abandoned them. You say, "How many people?" Your soulmate answers honestly. Maybe 3. Maybe several. They do not minimize. Then, I'm going to correct it. Beloved. Important. Not because you demanded. Because if they spread the wrong story, correction belongs to them. You respond, "I don't want some dramatic announcement." I know. Then, I'll correct it with the people I told. Simple. No spectacle. Perhaps your soulmate says, "I already called one." You are surprised. What did you say? They answer, "I told them I learned I was wrong. That you defended me. That you refused to support things about me you knew were false. And that I had no right to keep using that moment as evidence you didn't care." Beloved. Maybe you become quiet. This is action. Not only apology. Then your soulmate asks, "Can I ask you something difficult?" You say, "What?" "Why did you stay with me after I accused you the first time?" Beloved. Perhaps you laugh sadly. Because I loved you. Your soulmate winces. Then you add, "And because I thought eventually you would know me well enough to realize the story didn't fit." There. Maybe soulmate says, "I didn't know why." You think. Then, because your hurt was louder than your curiosity. Beloved. Powerful. Your soulmate had a memory. They built a conclusion. Every later event was filtered through it. Maybe when you needed space. See, they disappear. When you avoided talking about the meeting. See, they are guilty. When you became defensive about loyalty. See, they know they failed me. Beloved. Once a story becomes emotional truth, people start recruiting evidence. Your soulmate finally understands. Perhaps they say, "I made you live inside a verdict I had reached without a trial." You reply, "That's dramatic." Maybe both laugh slightly. Then, "But yes." Beloved. A little warmth enters. Perhaps that is the first time the memory has felt less poisonous. Your soulmate asks, "Do you regret defending me?" You answer immediately, "No, beloved." That surprises them. Even after everything? You think. Then, "I regret how we handled what came afterward. But what they were saying about you wasn't true." Pause. I don't regret telling the truth. Beloved. Your soulmate starts crying again. Why? Because perhaps they had spent years believing your defense, if it existed at all, would have been a romantic sacrifice. But you frame it differently. Truth. Not ownership. You would perhaps have done the same even if the relationship ended the next day. Because false is false. Maybe your soulmate says, "I don't think I deserve that from you." You respond, "Don't do that." What? Turn this into whether you were worthy. Beloved. Then, you were being treated unfairly. That was enough. Powerful. Perhaps your soulmate has to rethink love. Maybe they had always believed loyalty meant, defend me because I'm yours. You were operating from, I know what happened, and I will not lie. That is stronger. Perhaps days later, your soulmate sends you another message. I corrected the story with everyone I told. Beloved. No screenshots necessary. Maybe you ask, how did they react? One person said they always wondered if there was more to it. Another apologized for judging you. Perhaps you say, I don't need their apology. Your soulmate responds, I know. Then, I needed to stop letting my version keep doing damage. Beloved. Good. Perhaps the organization itself is no longer relevant. No official correction needed. No investigation. The emotional repair is interpersonal. Then your soulmate does something else. Maybe they contact the person who got the opportunity you lost. Not to reclaim anything. Just to understand. Perhaps they learn that your career ultimately went another direction. Maybe a better one. But beloved, this does not erase what happened. Your soulmate asks you one day, did losing that role change your life? You think. Yes. Was it worse? Interesting. You answer, different. Maybe you eventually found something better. Perhaps not immediately. Then, it hurt then. But I don't build alternate lives in my head anymore. Beloved. Your soulmate smiles sadly.